Bandwidth for Changelog is provided by Fastly. Learn more at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com. And we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog.
Hello and happy Friday. It's Tim Smith, senior producer at Changelog. I'm doing a feed takeover today to play for you an episode of my new show, Away from Keyboard. Away from Keyboard is a show about the human side of creative work, where I talk to creative professionals about their story, what makes them tick, how they do what they do, and the challenges of life and creative work. The following is my latest episode with Jeff Robbins. Enjoy. From Changelog Media, this is Away from Keyboard, a show exploring the human side of creative work. I'm Tim Smith. Where do I even begin to introduce Jeff Robbins? You see, Jeff has had a few different successful careers in the time that most of us get around to one. He worked on the web before there was a web, started a company that's built some of the most famous Drupal websites. And as if that weren't enough, he was in a band in the 90s that signed with A&M Records, toured the US and Canada, and played some of the coolest events. So where exactly does Jeff's story begin? In a magical place called the 80s.
Okay, let's go into the Wayback Machine, Tim. Man, I've been interested in computers, and that kind of stuff for a long time, and I'm old, so it goes way back. In the 80s, my dad bought a IBM PC Junior, which was like the cheaper one that people could afford for their house. And I started learning basic programming on that, and then I did all kinds of stuff. I had a Hewlett-Packard programmable calculator that I'd won in the state math fair, it was the science fair. In my town, it was the math fair. Then we went to the state science fair, and I won this calculator, and I programmed it to play Monopoly. So I'm a nerd going way back to the 80s. And then I bought an Atari ST computer that had MIDI ports on it, so I could hook it up to my synthesizers and drum machines and stuff like that. And I remember I worked all summer to save up the $1,200 or whatever it was that the Atari cost. And then I realized, if I got a modem, I could connect to these bulletin board systems and talk to people and, find out information and stuff. And so I did that, with the various bauds of modems over the years. And I eventually realized that I could make some money with my computer skills. And I started doing temp work on Macs and learned desktop publishing, and eventually learned freehand, which was kind of a precursor to what we now call Illustrator, and ended up getting a job at O'Reilly doing technical illustrations for their books. And they were connected to the internet, which was really cool. And so I could FTP out to things, and there was a thing called Gopher, which was a precursor to the web, and I could connect to these free software, actually free software, not pirated software, but open source software boards, and download software, and it was so much faster than doing it over my modem. And then the web started, and O'Reilly being kind of one of the kind of at the crossroads of that stuff, writing about books about TCP/IP and all of, they had a book about Gopher and FTP and all that kind of stuff. The people at CERN who were developing the HTTP protocol and HTML came to the office in Cambridge where I was working, and kind of did this pitch hey, I'll need to get into the web. The web's going to be the big thing. We want this to be a big thing. And O'Reilly should write books about it. And Tim O'Reilly and Dale Doherty, being the visionaries that they are, said, well, we're going to do more than that. We'll create an online magazine and use our publishing skills to do web stuff. And so they started creating the Global Network Navigator, GNN.com. And I was involved in a lot of the brainstorming of that. And the woman who would eventually become my wife was the designer. So my wife is the first commercial web designer. And I got so excited that before GNN even launched, I started one of the world's first web development companies in 1993. And it was an uphill battle because no one had heard of the web. No one wanted a website because they didn't know what it was. They would say things like, I got burned. We spent all this money on a CompuServe page. We invested all this money in Prodigy, and now Prodigy is shutting down. How is the web going to be better than that? And so I would have to do sales pitches that were like that. And then about a year later, my band got caught up in all record labels were very excited about it. We got caught up in a bidding war, and I said goodbye to web stuff and spent the rest of the 90s in a van driving around the country.
Wow.
And we eventually played Lollapalooza and all sorts of radio festivals, and I got to see most of the places in the United States and Canada and a few places in Europe and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of my web friends went on to found what are now very big empire kind of.
Right.
And but I was their, cool guy who they met through web stuff who was in a band, and the band was touring around and playing Lollapalooza and stuff. And for me, they were like, oh, I know the guy that started Flickr and
Right.
Blogger and Twitter and Slack and things like that.
So what did you do with your company when you decided to tour with the band?
I handed it over to my business partner.
Was that a difficult decision for you?
I got offered a record deal, Tim, in 1994. It was like rock and roll. No, it was not a difficult decision.
I figured that'd be the answer, but I wanted to ask just in case.
I started doing web stuff for the band. We created the first record label website for the little independent record label that we were running on the side. My band was one of the first bands to have a website, and then we got signed to A&M Records, and I was in there talking to them about like, oh, what are you guys doing with this whole web thing? And they kind of looked at me like, well, if there are any conferences that you want to go to and you could speak on behalf of A&M. And so I kind of, for, a couple of years before they kind of got going with it, I was sort of like the de facto web guy for A&M Records while I was in one of the bands on their label and stuff like that. So I kept my hand in.
What brought you back to the web?
Well, in about 2001, there were a whole bunch of record label mergers. There were in the 90s, there were 9 major record labels. And over the course of about a year and a half, that number went to 3. So basically, they just all sort of collapsed in on each other. And, our first album had done well, but basically A&M came back to us and said, hey, we think you've got momentum here. Rather than squeezing everything we can out of this album, why don't you go in and do another album? However, when the accountants came plummeting through to try and decide which bands to keep and which to leave while these labels were merging, we just hadn't sold enough records. And so we lost our record deal. And we kind of fumbled on for a while. We put out some stuff independently and went back to that record label that we'd started back in like 91, 92. And, it was a few years before the label money dried up, but I, put out my shingle and started doing freelance stuff. I got a job at an ad agency. Through a series of circumstances and coincidences, my wife and I ran Ringo Starr's website for about three years, and that sort of led to bigger and other projects for sort of celebrity type people and kind of bigger and bigger web projects, which eventually led me to Drupal. And in trying to build a really big and difficult Drupal website, I met Matt Westgate, who was just a guy doing work in the Drupal community. And I met him on a message board because he was just the most friendly person answering my questions, all of my really like kind of beginnery questions. And he was super friendly. And I said, hey, can I get on the phone with you? Can I just ask you these questions? I would pay you. I'd done the math. And if like I could pay you to answer these Drupal questions for me, then it would save me time and it would be well worth it for me to pay you out of my own pocket. And so I did that. And the whole time I'm saying, this is so great. You really know this stuff. This is like, you can't find this information anywhere. And as the project was starting to wrap up, I kept saying to him, like, we got to do something. I got to pay you back more than just the money I'm paying you. Like, let's do something. Let's start a company where you can explain to people how to use Drupal. I know how to start a company. I know how to promote things. And that's what became Lullabot. And Lullabot started in 2006, and it was still really early days. With Drupal, there weren't any books out about it or anything like that. So we, Lullabot people authored some of the first. Well, Matt authored one of the first Drupal books, and we started the first Drupal-related podcast and did the first Drupal trainings and built a lot of the kind of first Drupal websites that people have heard of. We launched on January 1st, 2006, mostly to just make it easy to remember. And by March, I have pictures of us sitting in a pub in London where we were starting work on the MTV UK website, which was kind of the first website where, because previous to that, it was like, oh, the, University of Calgary has built their, this website, like, oh, it's really cool. Like, okay. But it wasn't like MTV, and so, from there we did all kinds of stuff.
Think back to 2006. To you, what was the scariest thing of starting a company?
I don't know. So about a year prior to that, maybe a little over a year prior to that, I had a job at an ad agency, and my wife and I were running Ringo Starr's website, and the people at the ad agency kind of thought that was cool and a little bit like, why are you here at this little Providence ad agency when you're doing all these things out there? But my wife was pregnant. We just bought a new house, and I walked into my manager's office to ask for more time off. I was out of my vacation days, but there was another web conference I wanted to go to, and I thought it was fine. Just don't pay me, and he turned to me and he said, "What are you doing here? Like, why are you working here?" You could be doing other things. You know that, right? And I said, yeah, I know, I guess so. He said, go do other things. I said, okay, all right. And so I left there, and I left that job. And as I was driving home, I was thinking, wait a minute, did I just quit? Or was I fine? I just bought a house. I've got a mortgage, and I've got a, my son was born 3 months later. And so jumping off into the abyss is kind of my skill. And so I'm not saying that it's not scary. I'm saying that perhaps my skill is just not being able to estimate how scary it will be.
Right.
So was Lullabot scary? No, not at all. It seemed like the next thing to do. And we had a whole lot of success early on. I mean, the fact that we got MTV within 3 months of starting was key. It felt like, oh, this is good. It's a positive feedback mechanism. But, as we started to hire people, there were definitely fearful points, why am I doing this? And it's the same thing with the band or anything. It's like, well, why am I doing this? The answer is because at one point I thought it would be really cool.
Right.
That'd be cool. I'm going to do that. The metaphor I always use is it would be really cool to swim across this lake. And about halfway swimming across the lake, it's like, what the F? Then why did I do this? This is crazy. I have no idea how I'm going to get across this lake, And then you get to the other side and all these people come up and go wow, it is so great that, wow, I don't know how you did that. That's so great. It's because I was going to drown otherwise. I don't know. There's some lessons in there somewhere for somebody, I'm sure. But that's how I work.
Coming up, Jeff talks to me about why he's such a champion of remote work, why he thinks it's the future of work, and adjusting to life after leaving a company he built and ran for so many years.
What's up, AFK listeners? Adam Stacoviak here, editor-in-chief of Changelog. If you've been enjoying Tim's exploration of the human side of creative work, you'll probably love our show, Founders Talk. Founders Talk features stories from founders, CEOs, and makers about their journey, their lessons learned, and the behind-the-scenes of building and running their company. Here's a preview of Pia Mancini, co-founder and CEO of Open Collective. She's sharing some of the struggles of being a mother and a startup founder. The first few months are absolutely hard, so super challenging, They need your attention. They can't walk. They can't do anything for themselves. And, you're trying to keep doing, but then also, doing your responsibility as a parent. And it's just it's just probably the most challenging parts of a parent's life is those first, 6 months to 9 months of the child's life.
For sure. But it also gives you an extra energy, an extra, creativity. I don't know if it's the hormones or what, but it's you have that, you go into a different gear. You just keep pushing forward. I don't know. There's something that kind of makes you yeah, just shift gears into that extra thing, and you can do it. Also, what I found mostly with motherhood is I don't have time for BS, essentially, like at all. Like, because I have very little time to waste or to spare. So at least I became really good at saying no to things and just really cutting loose things or situations or people that I didn't have time. It made me much more focused, because the time I have away from my daughter is like, I'm doing this, right? Otherwise, I'm with her.
So Founders Talk is all about in-depth, one-on-one conversation with founders and makers. If you dig that, learn more and subscribe at changelog.com/Founders Talk.
From Changelog Media, this is Away from Keyboard. I'm Tim Smith. When Jeff and Matt Westgate started Lullabot in 2006, they decided that it would be a distributed company from day one. I've always thought it was such a brave decision, but Jeff describes it more as a happy accident.
In itself, it was a little bit of a leap of faith, that missing part of my brain. But it worked really well. And even just sort of because it was an experiment, it allowed everything to be more agile and thoughtful. That, like, I don't know, how should we talk to each other? How should we keep in touch? How should we communicate? How should we, when you have these barriers where you're not all coming into an office and kind of falling into these legacy systems and processes of like, of course, I know what it means to work at an office and commute for an hour each direction. Like, I know how that works.
Yeah.
But none of us knew how it worked. And so it was really great to kind of figure it out as we went. But as we figured it out, it was like, this is great. Like, I want to share this with other people. And having worked at O'Reilly Media in the early 90s and being a friend with Tim O'Reilly, Tim has a saying that everyone has a book in them. What's your book? And my wife has written several books about web design and continues to do that. And so I thought, like, I want to share this, but I don't quite feel like I can speak on behalf of a community of companies that are doing this. I could just talk about what Lullabot did, but I don't know if that will help anyone because it's kind of built into the company's DNA, and I kind of want to get a good cross-section of like what's going on. And I think that for companies to talk to each other would generally be good. And so I had this idea to do a conference, but a sort of a discussion, what I call a round table discussion conference. And we decided to call it Yonder, where we invited people that were running distributed companies, remote teams, company leaders and managers to just kind of sit around in a room together and share, ask questions, share ideas, and to have a discussion. And that's how Yonder got started. As I started to make my way out of Lullabot, I took the brand along with me and started doing a podcast, and eventually hired some people to do content. And we have an active newsletter now. Yonder.io is where people should go to find out more about Yonder and get on the mailing list and listen to the podcast if you're a podcast person. And if you're listening to this podcast, you probably are a podcast person.
Right.
There's a fair amount of resources out there that are sort of aimed at remote workers or sort of digital nomads, But my fear is that discussion is a little bit of an echo chamber, and it doesn't actually expand the job market. It doesn't create more jobs for those people. So my focus has been trying to talk to companies and about companies and how companies hire and manage and run remote teams. I think remote workers will find it interesting, and it's sort of this idea of like managing up, for the workers to understand what good management look like. They can kind of nudge their managers in the right way. Hey, have you heard this podcast? And ultimately kind of create a better work environment. But that's my goal my mission with Yonder is to really expand that market. And, it's happening slowly. The companies that are doing remote work, there's so much excitement and elation around how good it is that it's easy to kind of think that everyone must understand that. But really, in that world of like Fortune 500 companies, we're just not there yet. Those companies are not champing at the bit to make remote work. But I think, we're going to hit the tipping point in the next few years, and the podcast is going to become very popular.
Yeah.
It's already pretty popular, but
I like the description that remote work is the future of work. And, I really do think that the companies that have latched onto this idea have only benefited because they have this amazing pool of people that they can hire from.
Absolutely.
That isn't tied to any particular location. And I think a lot of the times you find people who are really great workers, who are kind of devoid of the as I like to say, ass and seat mentality, where as long as I'm here for 8 hours, I did what I was supposed to do, right? Rather than, I feel like the remote work kind of whole idea is to be productive in the moments that you're in front of your desk.
Well, yeah. I mean, remote work is autonomy. Like, the idea of autonomy is not an add-on to work when you're doing remote work. Like, you can work at McDonald's and you're not going to have any autonomy. You could work at Starbucks and, there's a little bit more culture and they give us a little bit more choice. I have some autonomy,
Right.
This feels great. If you're doing remote work, people can't look over your shoulder. There are certainly companies that are developing tools for this sort of big brother shoulder looking over, but you're kind of fighting against nature a little bit there,
Yeah.
And then there are some prerequisites for allowing some autonomy, which is trust, respect. Oftentimes, and you mentioned this, but, to sort of expand on it a little bit, one of the reasons that companies who are hiring remote workers can get such great talent is because there are so many people that want to work remotely.
Yeah.
And not only are you choosing from a larger talent pool, kind of by definition, you're offering a better job, right? Because it's more flexible and offers probably autonomy and trust and respect along with it, right?
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully. I don't, companies have all sorts of different cultures, and even distributed companies have all sorts of different cultures. But this means, like, most of the companies I talk to, I was just talking to Addie Berry, who runs Drupalize Me, which was a spin-off company from Lullabot that does Drupal training online. And she was saying they were hiring a customer support person. She said that they got, I think it was like 3,000 applications in
Wow.
4 or 5 days or something.
Wow.
Like, it was just like an incredible amount of and so from that, now you're just playing numbers, right? This is just statistics,
Right.
How many of those people are good? How many of those people are great? How many of those people are better than you could imagine? Like, just sift through them and find the ones that are better than you can imagine and then hire them. And now you've got people working at your company that are better than you can imagine,
So it's been a few years now that you've left Lullabot. What led up to that decision?
Well, I'm a starter. I'm a big thinker. I like solving really difficult problems, and I like making things that are kind of indistinct more distinct. Things that are confusing more clear. So that comes into like things like branding and kind of building culture and all that kind of stuff. And I also really like working with really great, talented people, and so. Over the years with Lullabot, there were a lot of big problems to solve. Who are we? How do we talk about ourselves? What do we do? How do we do what we do? What is health insurance? How do you offer health insurance to employees? Things like that are these like, and so over time, I'm not saying that I did all of that, but I helped to find really great people to come in and help Lullabot to do that. And we have hired a really great leadership team of really capable people. I don't tend to carry a whole lot of ego when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'm happy to relinquish control and let other people do things when they're capable. And so I kind of got to a point where I, was surrounded by all these really capable leader people, who were running the company, and we had kind of figured out who we were. There were a couple of years that were kind of looking for the missing pieces. What are we not thinking about? What are we not thinking about? Like, what are the pieces that are falling between the cracks? Like, I've, found somebody to do sales, and I found someone to do HR. What are we not thinking about? But as even those pieces started to get kind of at least defined, if not fixed, I found myself sort of I wouldn't say with nothing to do, but just kind of getting antsy. And my business partner, Matt, started to see me kind of in that position. And he said, what do you need? And I said, I don't know. Well, do you want to take some time off? Maybe you could take a sabbatical and just sort of, find your mojo. And when you're running a company, it's like having children. You wouldn't ever consider not being there for them, right? You would, this is just, this is my life. It's not even, you don't even think of it as a responsibility because there's not the option to not do that. You have a responsibility to feed yourself, but it doesn't feel like a burden. It's just what you do, And in that same way, I was just running Lullabot. But as I started thinking about kind of stepping away and kind of catching my breath, it was really more appealing than I really kind of surprised myself. And so I did that for a while. And about 6 months later, Matt came to me and said, listen, I've been thinking, if you wanted Lullabot to buy you out, we could do that. That would be a way that we could go. And he'd been doing a whole lot of research about employee-owned companies and just sort of the financial models around all of that. And he said, listen, we could do this for you. And then if Matt, wanted to do that, maybe at some point down the road, you would be paving the way for a model for me to do that if I ever wanted to do that. But it's taken me a good period of time to kind of find my identity, For so long, it was, the Lullabot guy. And people would even say like, oh, do you still play music? And I'd say, well, I don't know. How long can you go like not playing music and still call yourself a musician? and because it was just like, I was so, entrenched in the Lullabot stuff. And it was emotionally rewarding. There were great people. We were working on great projects, all of that stuff. I'm not saying that it was, but, I definitely had sort of set that part aside.
What has that adjustment period been for you? Because I would assume that when you build a business and it's so successful as Lullabot has been, and you running it for so many years, what is that adjustment like to walk away and, now try to have to, like you said before, trying to figure out what your identity is?
Yeah, it's weird, but it's been nice not to carry that weight. It allows me to even relate to the people who continue to work at Lullabot in a different ways. I'm not the boss anymore. And I started doing business coaching and talking to other people that lead other companies about what they're doing and kind of help them to think about their companies. And that's been super rewarding. It's a lot of the same stuff I was doing as the CEO of Lullabot, but I get to kind of help these other people who have different problems out. And share my experience. That's been really rewarding. And then I started a new band last year, and we put out a 5-song EP earlier this year, and that's been getting really good reviews and responses, and people, so I'm out. I just had a show on Saturday, and it was really great. So it feels really good to kind of be exercising those muscles again, recording and kind of the more like entrenched creative side of things. Because, I think that business is creative and it ought to be creative, but kind of at scale when there's a lot of money involved and I guess a lot of people involved too, you want to double check, right? You want to make sure the math adds up. So it's just really nice to be kind of back, where I can just like, I'm going to write a song that has one note. The whole song is just one note, and like, I can do that. People are going to say, oh, that's weird. I'm curious to listen to it. Not like, oh my God, you're going to drive our company to the ground. Like that's a crazy idea. Why would you do that? So it's nice to have that outlet, and it's a nice balance.
Jeff Robbins. You can find him at jjeff.com. Listen to songs from his band's latest EP at 123astronaut.com. AFK is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Tim Smith. The beats are from the one and only Breakmaster Cylinder. I'm Smith Timmy Tim on Twitter. You can find the show at AFK_show. Thank you to our sponsor, Hired. Head to hired.com/AFK. Our bandwidth is provided by Fastly. Learn more about them at fastly.com. We move fast and fix things here at Changelog because of Rollbar. Check them out at rollbar.com, and we're hosted on Linode servers. Head to linode.com/changelog. We'll be taking a bit of a break so that I can take a much needed vacation, and we'll be back on August 29th. One last thing before we go. Jeff told me what life is like having a record deal.
I mean, it wasn't particularly lucrative. You know, it meant that there was money to record, but more than that, it meant that, like, people cared. You know, there was sort of a support system. You know, we paid ourselves very minimally, just enough to get by, because we wanted to, you know, invest the money that was out there in making sure that the band could get out and have the money to tour and promote and be successful and stuff like that. So it was really, you know, it was great. You know, had a lot of like peak life experiences. You know, there's really nothing quite like standing on a stage playing to 20,000 people. Like, that's pretty cool. You know, and it's hard not to walk off stage and go like, that was really cool.
I'm Tim Smith, and this is Away from Keyboard.